The audiobook's second part of the three-part edition. Section 2: Armed Resistance. Attacks against civilians are unacceptable and condemnable under all circumstances. However, international law recognizes the right of occupied peoples to resist. It's important to emphasize that many consider Israel as an occupier and oppressor in Palestinian territories, which is one of the causes of the long-standing conflict. This doesn't excuse any excesses and cruelties committed by either side, but it puts them into context. The following important documents can help analyze and interpret the bigger picture. UN General Assembly Resolution 2649 from 1970. This resolution affirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples under colonial and alien domination, who have the right to self-determination, to recover this right by any available means. UN General Assembly Resolution 3246 from 1974. This resolution reaffirms the legitimacy of the people's struggle for liberation from colonial and foreign domination and alien occupation by all available means, particularly armed struggle. UN General Assembly Resolution 37/43 from 1982. This resolution reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial and foreign domination and foreign occupation by all available means, particularly armed struggle. Fourth Geneva Convention, from 1949. This treaty, to which Israel is a signatory, regulates the protection of civilians in war zones. Article 3, common to the four Geneva Conventions, establishes fundamental rules from which no deviation is permitted. It's applicable in the event of an international armed conflict and provides a minimum level of protection for those not participating in hostilities. UN Security Council Resolution 242 from 1967. This fundamental resolution emphasizes the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war and demands the withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from the territories recently occupied in the conflict. UN Security Council Resolution 338 from 1973. This resolution calls for a ceasefire in the Yom Kippur War and the implementation of Resolution 242. International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion on the Wall from 2004. According to the ICJ, the wall built by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory is contrary to international law. It stated that Israel should cease its construction, dismantle the sections already built, and compensate for the damages caused. UN Security Council Resolution 478 from 1980. This resolution condemns Israel's basic law concerning Jerusalem and reaffirms the Council's position that all legislative and administrative measures and actions taken by Israel, the occupying power, which aim to change the character and status of Jerusalem, lack legal validity and severely violate the Fourth Geneva Convention. These documents provide context and legal basis for a conflict. Although I know that this discussion is already quite long, understanding and comprehending the ongoing tyranny raging in the human age cannot be done with a short, cosmetic text, especially not to see into the centuries-old antecedents in the region. The UN documents are valuable in international law, yet often lack effective enforcement mechanisms. While the international community vocalizes the rights of Palestinians and urges the end of Israeli occupation, the realization in reality is much more complex. This is why it's of great importance that the reports accurately and balancedly convey the events, which often does not happen in practice. The Middle Eastern conflict, especially the Israeli-Palestinian issue, is extremely complex in reality. To create a fair and balanced picture about it, it's indispensable to include in the thought process the oppression, the occupation, the collective and individual suffering on both sides, and the realities of geopolitical interests as well. Many paid with their lives or limbs to inform the world about the events while seeking the truth, and the perpetual cycle of violence came with a plethora of innocent civilian victims. Therefore, it's crucial to depict the facts as accurately as possible. In memory of their sacrifices, too, it's important to approach the topic informed and thoughtfully without falling into serious error due to bias. In the UN Security Council, countries with veto power, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia, can reject any resolution, even if it enjoys the support of the other member states. If a single veto-holding member state votes against a proposal, it will not be accepted. Due to the exercise of the veto right, the Security Council often cannot act efficiently and quickly in certain crises, especially if it affects the geopolitical interests of any permanent member state. So, although the resolutions of the Security Council are binding, the veto right often may limit the Council's efficiency. If a resolution is adopted in the Council, i.e., there is no veto, mechanisms guarantee its implementation. But due to the exercise of the veto right, many resolutions do not come into existence, which under other circumstances perhaps would have been accepted. Section 3: Collective Punishment. An important segment of the debate is collective punishment as a war crime. In the context of armed conflict, collective punishment means that a group is punished for the actions of one or more members of the group. International law prohibits this, as it contradicts the principle that individuals can only be held accountable for their own actions. The prohibition of collective punishment is encoded in several international documents, including the Hate Regulations from 1907, the 50th article of the Regulations concerning the laws and customs of war on land, and X to the 1907 Hague Convention, states, "No general penalty, pecuniary or otherwise, shall be inflicted upon the population on account of the acts of individuals for which they cannot be regarded as jointly and severally responsible." The Fourth Geneva Convention, from 1949. This convention discusses the protection of civilians during wartime. Article 33 states, "No protected person may be punished for an offense he or she has not personally committed." Collective penalties, and likewise, all measures of intimidation, are prohibited. The first additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions, from 1977. This protocol reinforces the protection of civilians in international armed conflicts. Article 75, 2d, prohibits collective punishments alongside other prohibitions related to persons in the power of an adverse party. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, ICC, from 1998. Although the Rome Statute does not expressly label collective punishment as a war crime, actions characterizable as collective punishment often fall under other listed crimes, such as according to 8,2, a fourth article, extensive destruction and appropriation of property, not justified by military necessity, or 8,2b, first article, intentional attacks directed against the civilian population as such or against individual civilians not taking direct part in hostilities. Therefore, the execution of collective punishment is considered a war crime under international law. This means that individuals ordering or executing such actions can be held criminally accountable. Historically, various international courts, such as the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, and the International Criminal Court, ICC, have dealt with violations of international humanitarian law, including cases where collective punishment may have been applied. Section 4 reprimands. Israel has been subjected to numerous resolutions by various UN organizations since its establishment in 1948, in addition to the ones previously mentioned. The following list is not exhaustive, but provides an overview of key condemning resolutions against Israel. Most resolutions come from the UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council. UN General Assembly Resolution 3379 from 1975 determined that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. Note, this resolution was revoked in 1991 by UN General Assembly Resolution 46/86. UN Security Council Resolution 446 from 1979 determined that Israeli settlements in Palestinian and other Arab territories occupied since 1967 have no legal validity and pose a serious obstacle to achieving comprehensive peace in the Middle East. UN Security Council Resolution 452 from 1979 called upon Israel to cease the building of settlements in the occupied territories. UN Security Council Resolution 465 from 1980 reaffirmed that Israeli settlements are a flagrant violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. UN Security Council Resolution 471 from 1980 condemned the assassination attempts against the mayors of Nablus, Ramallah, and Al-Bira, and called upon Israel to apprehend the perpetrators. UN Security Council Resolution 478 from 1980 strongly condemned Israel for proclaiming Jerusalem as its capital, following the Israeli Knesset's adoption of the Jerusalem Law. UN Security Council Resolution 497 from 1981 declared null and void Israel's decision to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration on the Syrian Golan Heights. UN Security Council Resolution 904 from 1994 condemned the massacre committed by an Israeli settler in the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron and demanded measures to be taken to guarantee the safety and protection of the Palestinian civilians in the occupied territory. UN Security Council Resolution 1402 from 2002 called upon Israel to withdraw from Palestinian cities it had reoccupied during the Second Intifada. UN Security Council Resolution 1435 from 2002 demanded that Israel withdraw to positions held before September 2000 during the Second Intifada. UN Security Council Resolution 1860 from 2009 demanded an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza war and for Israel to fully open border crossings to allow aid to flow. UN Security Council Resolution 2334 from 2016 stated that Israeli settlements establishment in Palestinian territories occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant, in other words, blatant violation of international law. This list summarizes some major resolutions. Numerous other resolutions concerning Israel have been adopted over the years by various UN bodies. The UN Security Council had several instances where resolutions regarding Hamas were proposed or discussed. Such are the following. A resolution proposal submitted by Brazil, which originally condemned the disgusting terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas against Israel, as well as violence against civilians, and demanded a humanitarian ceasefire for aid deliveries to Gaza. The discussion of the resolution text continued, indicating that there was some sort of debate or deliberation within the UN Security Council regarding Hamas and its activities. A UN General Assembly resolution proposed by the United States condemned the activities of Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza, but was not adopted at the UN headquarters in New York. A case where the EU ambassador to the UN mentioned a resolution which, if adopted, would have been the first General Assembly vote condemning Hamas. A Russian resolution proposal that condemned violence and terrorism against civilians but did not mention Hamas was rejected in the UN Security Council. The resolution was submitted in response to an attack described as the worst Jewish massacre since the World War II Nazi Holocaust, referring to a severe event linked to Hamas, yet the resolution did not specifically deal with Hamas. These cases indicate that the UN Security Council had discussions and resolution proposals regarding Hamas, reflecting the complex and nuanced international attitude towards the group and its activities. While some resolutions directly condemned Hamas, others avoided the issue or were not adopted, highlighting the geopolitical intricacies within the UN Security Council. Section 5: Zionism. Given its appearance in resolutions and its fundamental influence on the dynamics of events, it's important to discuss Zionism. Zionism is a complex ideology with numerous aspects and interpretations. Historically, Zionism is a national movement aiming for the self-determination of the Jewish people and the establishment of an independent Jewish state in the historical territory of Israel, which is purportedly designated by God for the Jews. Some key considerations. Cultural Zionism. Zionism has cultural dimensions focused on the preservation and development of Jewish culture, traditions, and language. This aspect is difficult to interpret as racism. Political Zionism. Political Zionism focuses on the establishment and maintenance of the Israeli state. Critics often oppose its practical implementation, especially concerning the rights and demands of Palestinians. Nowadays, extreme manifestations along far-right characteristics operate within the Israeli state machinery. Definition of racism. Racism generally encompasses views, prejudices, or practices that regard a particular race or ethnic group as inferior or less valuable. To interpret Zionism as racism, it's necessary to ascertain whether it fundamentally operates on these principles. Some critics argue that policies and practices of the Israeli government and certain Zionist groups oppress Palestinians, interpreting this as racism. However, others believe that Zionism is based not on Jewish superiority, but on ensuring the safety and self-determination rights of the Jewish people. UN General Assembly Resolution 3379, which in 1975 condemned Zionism as a form of racism and racial discrimination, sparked much debate and opposition internationally. Many view the resolution as stemming from political motivations and not an objective assessment, with opposition to the resolution growing over the years. Towards the end of the Cold War, more countries became critical of the resolution. The changing geopolitical environment, pressure from the United States and other Western countries, as well as the hope of resuming Palestinian-Israeli peace talks, all contributed to the review of the resolution. In 1991, the UN General Assembly, with Resolution 46/86, revoked Resolution 3379. The revocation implied that Zionism was no longer considered a form of racism by the UN, reflecting the changing attitudes of the international community regarding the Israeli-Palestinian standoff and the question of Zionism. Various countries support Israel for different reasons, and these reasons do not always directly relate to Israel's internal or external policies. Some possible factors behind international support. Strategic partnership. Israel has strong military and intelligence capabilities and serves as a strategic partner for many countries in the Middle East. The United States, for example, has developed deeply embedded security and intelligence cooperation relationships with Israel. Economic interests. Israel has developed a dynamic technology and economic sector, making trade and investment relations attractive for other countries. Cultural and religious ties. Israel has strong diaspora communities around the world, especially in the United States and Europe. These communities maintain political and cultural relations with Israel. Additionally, Israel serves as a holy site for the three major religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It's important to note here that Judaism is not synonymous with Zionism, and anti-Zionism is not equal to anti-Semitism, also known as Jew hatred, since not every Jew is a Zionist, and not every Zionist is a Jew. Geopolitical contradictions. The Israeli-Palestinian situation plays a role in the foreign policy decisions of many countries. Certain countries support Israel to counterbalance other states or groups in the region. Diplomatic strategy. Some countries have established bilateral relations with both Israel and the Palestinians in order to play a mediating role in peace negotiations. Domestic politics. In many countries, there are domestic political groups that strongly support or oppose Israel's policies, and these groups can influence the foreign policy decisions of their country. It's important that while many countries support Israel for various reasons, it doesn't mean that every supportive country accepts or overlooks every action or decision of the Israeli government. Many supportive states have criticized Israel on certain issues, such as settler policy or regular excesses by security forces, as well as the sometimes absurd actions of the justice system, overwhelmingly against Palestinians who are held for indefinite periods without court decisions, viewed by many as hostages. Anglo-Saxon countries and Israeli relations. The complex interplay of geopolitical interests and strategic partnerships has played a role in the relations of Anglo-Saxon countries, especially the United States, with Israel. The efficiency of Israeli intelligence and the country's strategic position in the Middle East were important factors in this relationship.